So that's part of this thing.
Are we shutting out Corey? You don't want to.
Oh, I forgot that
So you guys stand listening here critic.
Sorry,
Corey. You got vetoed. We both struck about them.
I still be a 1-1 decision.
One more.
At the, what tournament was that? Is that Northwest Warm-Ups where our quarters round was Moncrief? And Moncrief? And Moncrief.
that's just
I can move down more.
No, you're all good. It's like I'm in a fort. Okay, I'm ready.
Actually not. Sorry.
Intervene in Russian militarily. No, increase pressure on Russia militarily.
Oh, where's my timer?
It's on the floor. You can drink.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank God.
Were you there for the last one?
It's almost over.
Let's get
It
to
was almost over before we began.
I know. The last time, I don't even want to tell the story right now.
Let's go.
Okay. The plan of the United States federal government should militarily pressure Russia by reactivating its missile defense program to develop a fully functional missile shield to protect the U.S. homeland and U.S. allies and states with security agreements. Again, the security guarantees. Again, the United States federal government should militarily pressure Russia by reactivating its missile defense program to develop a fully functional missile shield to protect the U.S. homeland, U.S. allies, and states with security guarantees. Any questions?
We have
Mayor.
context, but we'll take questions.
Yeah,
How's your day?
It's all over the place. All the place, like in Poland and Czech Republic, all throughout the old like Eastern Bloc states in Eastern Russia is where the initial missile defense was. Okay. Harm's first argument is that Russia's military is increasing the status quo. On Thursday, the military chief, Colonel General Valery Gerasimov, said that by 2030, Russia should expect wars over natural resources, which is why they're increasing their military and the status quo to be ready for these wars. He said that the share of new weapons will happen in Russian arms, which should reach 70% by 70%. We should reach at 70% by 2030. It's at 60% right now, and all missiles will be equipped with the Iskander missile system by 2020. This is a hypersonic system. These are missiles that travel at hypersonic speed and have pinpoint accuracy for 280 miles and have enormous amounts of missile or stuff on them. Also, the missile system is going to be established by 2020, and Russian aerospace forces will add to S-400s and S-500s to their missile system by 2020. These are capable of taking down missiles. So the next argument is that the global proliferation is coming in the status quo. Rogue states are empowered to gain nuclear material. There are sanctions on Iran right now, but they're failing dramatically. Not only is Iran bought the special steel that's necessary to fit a centrifuge so that the centrifuge can enrich uranium, but also they bought a bunch of magnets recently, which are these circular type of magnets that you put, these ring magnets that you put at the bottom of the centrifuge in order to be able to track the enriched uranium to the bottom of the centrifuge. This is the only reason that you buy these things is for nuclear weapons facilities. This means that the sanctions are failing in the status quo. Nuclear ambitions are currently the hype that we pay a huge dividend at nations fear military overpowering, which creates an incentive for nuclear weapons in the status quo in order to be able to counterbalance other nations. Our ability to control the international community through things like the NPT fail because they don't control development, which means that we don't remove any of the benefits of acquiring nuclear weapons in the status quo. Solvency. The missile defense system is capable of checking proliferation and ensures that no nuclear systems are created because the U.S. can protect against them, which means that the U.S. can protect all of its allies. Countries like Japan, which means that there is not a reason for allied proliferation. This decreases the incentive for the initial acquisition of nuclear weapons. Additionally, because there is not an effective threat against the NMD, against the NMD, which means that it's capable of defending countries. It decreases military and the utility of having a nuclear weapon in your military defense repertoire, which means that countries switch away from nuclear weapons use. This also restarts national missile defense signaling, which would be enough to restore U.S. credibility on military deterrence. The U.S. has adequate resources and geopolitical support to be able to station as part of NATO defense shield, which means that Western European countries would bandwagon behind the U.S. They were all part of the plans that were initially designed under NATO, and they would all probably want to be a part of the plans to reinvigorate the national missile defense the missile defense shield additionally is ready for operation. The application is for basing and launch sites in the Czech Republic and radar and Poland were all approved in 2008. This is necessary for strategic transatlantic alliances and for other countries. Additionally, there are other countries that fear Russia right now, like Georgia, which means there are the other countries that would probably want to comply and add more missile defense shields within their country. Relations have increased since 2008, which means that these countries would readily comply. Those locations for comprehensive defense against every type of nuclear weapon from Russia, China, Israel, in the shield. Additionally, in October, the U.S. conducted anti-ballistic testing. They were all capable of knocking down all types of missiles that we launched at them, including cruise missiles, long-term and short-term missiles. Since 2001, we have had 71 flight tests and 56 were hit to kill. We think that missile defense doesn't even need to be perfect. It would deter use just by insisting that we would allow for a larger asymmetry between technologies, which makes it untenable, and would require modernization in order to be able to shoot down our missiles that would shoot down their missiles. This means that it makes it very unlikely that China and Russia would have the money to be able to create this and do a priority which would decrease the benefit of investing in things like nuclear weapons. Also, it would supplement contemporary conventional military forces against our deployments because it would deter ballistic missiles, even partial protection is enough because it decreases the certainty of retaliation. It puts the attacker at a disadvantage because they don't know if they get 10% or 100% their missiles through, which means that you don't go to war because you don't have an acceptable amount of damage to be able to calculate, which means that you don't have a sustainable ability to go to war. Additionally, even leaking shield is capable of increasing deterrence because it increases our international credibility and retaliatory credibility. This would control the measures fail the status quo because current developmental schemes means that we implement better technology in the future. There is only a risk that this gets better. Our satellite systems and GPS allow us to track the origin of anything that exists within the sky. Also, impacts. First is the proliferation leads to miscalculation of war. We say that uncertainty about those who get nuclear weapons, it creates an incentive or preemptive strike, and it also creates a general security paradox. This is why we're capable of having a discussion of who's going to strike first, Israel or Iran. There's a general security paradox that is created in a world where nuclear weapons exist and are an enormous threat. Missile defense doesn't. The current missile defense system means that we don't know when someone is acquiring a nuclear weapon, which means that using it would just catch us entirely off guard. We are capable of resolving that in the world of what I see there. Is not an assessment of the impact of action, but absent the 1AC, which means that we're able to broaden the realm to solve for miscalculation, accidental launch, things like traffic theft, and especially distribution of nuclear weapons to non-state actors. This ensures that we stop weapons spread. We also solves the internally to being able to use nuclear weapons where non-state actors would not attack in the world of the NMT, which means that because it would not be able to go through the missile defense shield, they would additionally not, especially if they knew that the U.S. would be able to shoot their weapons out of the sky or be able to deactivate them. This means that it's particularly problematic for anyone to go to war for anyone to go to a large-scale war within the world of the 1AC. Means that we need also that this is necessary for U.S. hegemony because it is another boost to our military, which we say is necessary to stop any proxy conflicts. This means that the 1AC is the only internal link to being able to solve U.S. military primacy and to make a U.S. military strong military stance on who is best, which is the West.
Question.
Yeah.
How does building these things stop the theft?
Well, why would you go through all of the work of stealing something that would be entirely ineffective?
Do these missiles detect suitcase bombs?
They will detect anything that can be launched. I would personally articulate as a scientist that the amount of material that you would need to be able to cause any damage, really, like any large-scale damage, would require more than a suitcase, more than you, even as a strong man, would be capable of carrying in a backpack on your back.
So what you're saying is that when any missile gets launched, this missile defense system will automatically launch back and shoot it out of the sky.
I mean, we get to decide, but it's like,
Yeah,
it's not like autopilot.
it's not just Ender's Game.
So your suggestion
It
is that this 75% successful system is going to be enough?
It has been 100% successful in our.
Didn't you say 56 out of 71?
But in all of the recent tests, that was in 2001. In the recent test in October, it shot every single missile down. But you were correct. In 2001, it was 71.
It's gonna be 3 90s.
It's not nice everything over. I'm gonna put this one. Someone is like 3 90s.
Oh, I did that, didn't
That's, you want me to put it in?
I thought about that too. I need grammar too.
What I'm touching. Is everyone ready?
Yep.
First is going to be Ukraine, Russia Relations Society is going to be because Russia and Ukraine are at odds over a few issues. First of all, is NATO because oh my goodness, Putin basically said that if the Ukraine, Jesus Christ, U.S. cables undercover by WikiLeaks says that there's going to be a possibility of Ukraine getting a NATO bid. Number two is going to be gas. Ukraine, the UK regime says that they want to renegotiate a deal that was in 2009 in order to get Russia to basically put the bill for the transportation of gas from the Ukraine to the EU. Number two is that the U.S. stance has been really unclear on the Ukraine-Russia relations issue. A little late, so on September 2011, Congress passed a pretty pretentious resolution that congratulated Ukraine on its independence, but they also have a reservation because they're not having some democracy. And the little bit here said it made the U.S. Senate introduced a bill to condemn the imprisonment of Timu Saka, who was the previous Ukrainian prime minister. This bill also called for the withdrawal of the ambassador with the current regime. We'll see is that the Obama administration restart with relations with Russia, and every time he meets up with Putin, Congress makes a statement about how they're not comfortable with extending Russian influence. So basically, what we're saying is that each time that there's an action done for Ukraine or Russia, there's always, like, we don't pick sides. Like, it's always equitable. The links. First of all, the plan means that the U.S. gets assigned to Ukraine because all the major policies have been positive to Russia, and with not to Ukraine, which means the plan is the first time to take sides. Number two is that the plan means that the Ukraine hard community power relays that the Ukraine politics parties show a fracture by the strong opposition to the current regime in the 2011 election because the Fatherland Party, the Communist Party, the Ultra Nationalist Freedom Party, these are all hardliner parties who got the public majority collectively, but they couldn't unite together. Little C is that there's popular backlash coming out because the Congress study said that the rating for the current regime decreased popularity since the election. Additionally, the old regime said that thinks that the current regime is too soft, and finally, the Fatherhood Party got elected. It would draw on U.S. support in order to be able to gather other parties and countries to a political shift. So, because this looks like U.S. is supporting the old regime, it's going to embolden the old regime. That's the thesis of the links. The internal links that embolden Ukraine is going to be back. Cut the Russian pipeline because the old regime basically sent out a measure saying that we don't want Russia to be able to import gas right now. Additionally, that they have also started closing the pipeline, and this politics with people in Ukraine don't like the fact that Russia's gas is going through this, and also they associate the Russian gas with the corruption of the current regime. And the second term is that Ukraine is going to be renewed for NATO bid, but the current prime minister said that there's no way that they're going to go to NATO. But if hardliners get appeased, that means that they are going to want to get into NATO. They will get to NATO. The impact here is that Russia will make Ukraine one because Russia views Ukraine as an existential threat if it becomes a NATO member, and Putin said that if Ukraine joins NATO, then it will cease to exist as a state. It means that this will cause international drawing with NATO when Ukraine gets to NATO bid. This leads to nuclear war between the United States and Russia on a much faster time frame than anything that they're talking about on case off the turns case, because the world in which NATO is being drawn in, there's no way that missile defense can check back against conventional war, and also leads to nuclear war, which leads to extinction. Number two, impacts the pipeline closed down means that there's going to be resource wars that are already on the brink because last part of the EU made agreements on the budget for austerity, but if the pipeline gets cut off, then the austerity measures are going to be absolutely impossible. It means that people are going to be desperate for resources. It means that the EU and NATO moves in on Russia in order to get these resources. This is try or die, which means that there's defensive nuclear weapons to happen. It also leads to nuclear war. So either conventional war or extinction with nuclear war. Anything else? Next is going to be the criticism. Is the first is the thesis. The affirmative attempts to intervene in the affairs of Russia and a brush line between the national and the global sovereign America as well as police is that to be resolving limited problems with Russian relations. By doing so, it undeviates itself from domestic entity every time the border entry traverses itself to become the global sovereign. And it says state of exception to make life fair. Only the alternative alone, such as the relation between the individual and the sovereign, vice versa, that has the propensity to be able to radically unsettle the sovereign and manifest new politics in which the emphasis is transparent and the power is non-normative. The links once that the system's sovereignty possibly redefine themselves first in opposition to the state of nature, but then to make legitimacy sustainable in opposite to their own failings, i.e. Russian relations. Is this little a? And that the state of exception norms politics in which every case is exceptional, in which must be acted on the affirmative uses to justify the in-between and the atmosphere of Russian sovereignty sees that by, like, literally putting missile defense as a means to put
of pressure on Russia. The United States opposes the emptiness of its own, claims legitimacy. The affirmative state, the affirmative is the state's legitimization of any action into its own chaos. This abandons any sort of comment and claims to create. Number two, that the affirmative is an arbitrary exclusion of Russia and people on the ground that they represent an existential threat to the sovereign. This reverses the recent PNTR and exacerbates the reversal of the right and the good. Says that it fixes Russian relations by doing something and dislikes the circulatory such logic is blatant fascism, soft fascism. Three is the perception of the incomplete but preferable system creates a self-fulfilling prophecy that legitimizes only the sovereign and the cycle. The impact of personality create no finite life, policing the international spirit of this life, and therefore death in the balance of sovereign power people determining which life is valuable and which life must be destroyed. This renders life there by calling into existence on states' own terms limits potentially anything else. It limits HC to ultimate dehumanization and the attunement to all atrocity means the reason why the cause of the resource wars they're talking about is a result of this type of politics means we turn case to that violence by power, the exception, state exception justifies all form of discipline. This creates an auto-humanization where we basically start to attack ourselves in order to create the perfect person, the perfect politics. This systems of control means describe methodology, representations, and discourse in which they all operate, which means that all but a totalizing reduction solves. The alternative is devoting to embrace alterity. The alternative is devoting to embrace alterity. One is that only reform, alterity is understanding the other on its own terms and identity without the lack. One is that only reformalization exhausts by a political state exception to the endorsement of chaotic model self. Two is settling, we unsettle the blind certainty shared by many in the realist realm. Three is the affirmative values, we affirm the value life to solve the entire case. Per freedom's money, either you sever the reps of the PMC or to reject themselves from the voter because you create yourselves to move the target if you can't have any stable offense voter for reasons of fairness, or you just separate yourself and create a safe exception, the state exception in order to do the alt except in this instance means that you link over 9,000 times and or the permanent I'm just going to call it the change to the footnote of the biopolitical history. I'm not going to read it. We're going to case. Alright, advantage. First of all, U.S.-Russian relations are high and swell means that there's going to be no risk of any sort of retaliatory war happening now because Jackson Manor was appealed and also this extreme. We have wait, I don't want that. And the restart of relations means that it wants to contact with Putin. Additionally, all of your arguments about how there's a resource war. First of all, Russia just replaced their Minister of Defense to a more soft line. It means that there's not going to be the hard line rhetoric you're talking about now. Additionally, your time frame's way down the road. Our increased relations means there's going to be enough trade ties so to be able to check back with the resource wars between Russia and the United States. Additionally, we're developing green tech now, which means that we're always going to be able to solve back for any sort of resource wars we're having now, because we're going to be able to create a more sustainable climate. Additionally, your missile defense argument, your arguments about how missile defense are going to deter people from getting nuclear material is absolutely asinine. You say places like Iran are still going to proliferate. They've done it in the face of sanctions. No reason why. Missile defense would be even better. Additionally, they're increasing their influence in places like South America, which means that missile defense won't be able to stop back or check back against missiles being launched in this area. Additionally, plans going to be increasing terrorist activity that's going to be perceived as the U.S. moving in. So even if we don't have nukes, we're still going to have a shit ton of conventional war.
What was can you give me the case argument, the third and fourth case arguments? Sorry, the second and third case arguments.
I don't remember what I said.
Logan?
Restart contact with Putin. Obama and Putin are on this thing.
Yeah.
The third one was Russia just replaced its Minister of Defense to a more soft line.
Okay. And then the next one was Iran still pro-life.
It's just people will still pro-life.
Then it was trade ties check.
Trade ties, okay. Can I have the alt text?
Vote nay to embrace alterity. Five words.
Yeah, I can have that. Oh, okay. What? Oh, you can. I can remember embrace alterity.
Well,
I got this one.
Don't forget vote.
Okay, it's going to be 1AC in order. Critique is that.
Oh, we're sorry.
First, you stated that the relations of Howard and South Pole on Thursday, Katie's argument comes and said that Russia's being with military in order Well, the arguments about the Magnitsky Law and human rights violations involving the United States Russian relations are on the brink right now. Even conversations between Obama and Putin are going to some back this. In addition, the conversations that you're making are talking about the new defense minister Lavrov. After the news that he comes out with Biden, Lavrov didn't make any claims about what about coming out of action. Still to be a huge hard response party, and still dedicated to communicate the possibility for them to bring increased military tax works. You say trade tax abuse. This is a true Russia's expanding through different types of aid and pipelines with other places to cut out the United States in order to be able to go forward. That's in the future. This would happen at the APEC conference over the summer Russian strategy moving forward. Shows this would indicate that there's no long-term solvency. You can risk another country to be able to proliferate. Look, there's no incentive to proliferate at the point where the United States is going to be able to shoot down the missiles. This gives it at least a very large time frame in order to be able to, where there's not going to be nuclear development, where the United States can figure out how to stop all the other types of terrorism that are capable of happening. You say not increasing influence in South America. Look, the missile defense shield applies to everywhere, applies to everywhere. Unfortunately, we can also build it in other places. Means that we're going to be able to slide back into the plan increases the capable of sliding back rate. The plan increases terrorism. This simply is a true articulate that we're able to slide back to terrorism. This is the only way to deter terrorists. It's not to use deter destruction, which means the only way is to isolate that they can have lasting effect in the United States. We know the United States retaliate because once they attack, we know who they are. To get the risk of retaliation means they won't be able to do the one cross apply. The impacts that on the cross apply, the impacts that Katie Woodford said that proliferation and miscalculation are never within the status quo, as well as preemptive strikes happening in the status quo, people catching off guard, as well as some amounts of networks in the world within the world after what you see. The only way to stop this and stop that distribution the Nazi actors is creating this defense shield. This is the influence of commerce and decrease in violence in the short term and long term. Crazy. Let's start with health. First argument is vote act to embrace alterity. Vote act to embrace alterity. First argument, this isn't separate. The A's point is that you are capable of bringing disadvantages that embrace the policy making logic as well as reading critique indicates that if you're severing out, securitizing logic within the reason which will separate the rest of the 1AC. In addition, we articulate that you have no links to the writer of the 1AC. It's people are capable of understanding embracing alterity and charity as well as understanding the military relationship with Russia is possible and capable of being able to do both because multiple cosmologies and ontologies can exist within the same space, within the same space with consistency in order to understand the things that are capable of happening. And furthermore, even if the permutation severance fully agrees with that, the permutation on region driver team would be targets not moving targets not H because historical they test on competition indicates whether or not what the best option is in order to see. What? It's just a test of competition, every single objective team. No moving target. We're just doing the act and the alt. It's not serving out the rest of the 1AC. And we should be allowed to sever the rest of the 1AC because we're changing the framework that we're doing. Next. Permutation is the only way to achieve long-term solvency for three reasons. The first reason is because the world abs and the world abs political clash and Roman backlash occurs, and we're not capable of solving this. And these militarism increases within militarism increases, and the impact of critique become now dissolved and less of liberal thought to take it out of seceding from politics. This means we have to be able to generate coalitions that we're going to be able to understand and generate within the political system. The next argument is authenticity fanaticism. Your critique. Sorry, no, that's. The next argument is that permutation solvency is the only way to deconstruct the system of state exceptions to work within the system when you have an alternative like the chief and simply break the entirety of the system. There are resistance to it because it becomes very visible. Work within the system, the permutation is more coercive and allows us to have subdued resistance, which is capable of changing the system from the inside. The next argument is going to be the terms. First argument is alternative that increases authenticity fetishism. You assume that the world of the mind embraces alterity within, or individual has capable of solving all the problems that exist within the real world. This assumes that we don't have any biases that exist within, or the biases within us and that simply exist. It like this isn't true. It doesn't allow us to understand the ways in which we are inherently biased and inherently violence exists with individuals. But being able to understand this is only going to solve what else happen in the future. Furthermore, furthermore, alternative fascism that creates totalitarian ontology because you're allowed to think in one direction. The permutation is the only way to break free from this and allows multiple ideas, which is the key to being able to challenge within the critical discourse and the critical and discursive realm. The next argument is that you see this referring value life. The first argument is that you need to have value life before you can have value. We'll get that later too. Okay, that's all I want to know now. On to that impact debate. You said value life. First argument is overarching claims about what considers value life as centralized individuals makes us think that all individuals have the same value life and exist within the same space. This doesn't understand the way in which cultural individuals have access to different types of culture and have access to value life through their specific means. Saying the overarching claims of value life takes away individual agency to be able to make good to make good things happen within bad situations. This overarching claims that it plays rhetorical violence against oppressed persons and individual motivation. Next argument is term usage. The circumstances where by your third meaning, your third or by some instances where biopower can be good within instances of things like stop signs as well as instances like laws that prohibit against race or all instances of biopower. Biopower is going to be good within some instances because the rest violence happening with the normal when I see where she because the source can be compete because he's solving for ethics. Significant ethical relationship with the other and attempt to solve and solve and save lives and we're never capable of overhead that we're never capable of valuing life, which means that people simply become to solve populations, controls in turn link to your argument that which controls the internal to your argument. The next ethics is also a net benefit to fermentation. Next argument is that the state of inspection is inevitable. First argument is section 11, the way in which even if you're capable of deconstructing within this debate round, it's not capable of reading the state system. The state is going to exist inevitably because it's capable of overcoming all resistance movements that happen in the past and it's going to be capable of overcoming this within the future. Furthermore, the state of exception is the only way in which we can protect our populations against outside threats and be protecting the individuals. It's the basis of life because we think that life is going to be capable of being vital. Otherwise, it's a sense of denialism and simply leads to a role to vital life. That's the alternative. That would be the alternative to unique nihilism and independently outweigh the impacts. Furthermore, this means that this state of exception is the only way to avoid this. Furthermore, state of exception is inevitable because of realism from the way the countries interact with each other. It's the only way they're capable of doing so. We do not capable of changing all international relations. Yeah, I'll go back to that. None of their links are specific. Don't even give them those. This end, bottom. I don't need to deal with any of the top levels of this debate. Look, you said that we're going to enter a nuclear war with Russia or conventional warfare. Our 1AC says it's impossible to enter nuclear warfare with Russia in a world post-1AC because Russia can't nuke us. This indicates that our conventional military capacity on the ground is going to be far superior than Russia's because of different things that we have, because of different naval technology that we have as well, different types of planes that we have as well. The other reveals that Russia doesn't have the economy to be able to develop this military infrastructure, which means in any conventional warfare we would win in the conventional warfare. Means that Russia doesn't want to enter it when Russia just doesn't want to enter this world. Request like the trade ties argument will check if the will short term because of conventional warfare would disrupt their supply lines to oil, which is the reason why Russia wouldn't want to be able to do this. You say resource wars, conventional warfare wouldn't happen. We're capable of solving this. What else do you want to hear, Katie? Oh, yeah, actually solve this. On the link level, we'll do it. First argument is that you say that the United States never picked sides over the Russia issue. This is empirical. The United States has always been against Russia. And for Ukraine witnesses come up with witnesses are capable of coming up within the region. In addition, you said the Ukraine party hardliners are going to be able to shut down the pipeline. The Russia Ukraine party on the internal link level debate. Sorry, I'm just jumping around. Okay, so that's no link because it's empirically denied. Next is the internal link. Even hardliners in Ukraine won't cut the pipeline Russia because they know that conventional warfare that would respond would disrupt the lives of individuals that existed within their territory. They don't want to risk this, and they don't view the United States as being capable because on security guarantee for conventional warfare with them, which means they would never cut the pipeline. Even if they had a renewed NATO bid, it's simply Russia's posturing to attempt to gain international pressure on the NATO bid doesn't indicate that they would actually war with Ukraine over this. Furthermore, they're not capable of doing this in a world in which the United States has far superior military capacity and has the ability to stop all of their different types of weapons technology. We saw for the anything else on this decade?
We just have a better military. Yeah, like they would not go to war with us. We have more people. We have better technology. We have the best military technology in the whole world.
And
decades behind us.
We have more rocket guys as well, and more magazines.
We have more magazines.
Right. Thank God they got that.
We have more time.
Oh, okay. You can the order will be criticism, then the disad, then the case.
Disad then case.
Yes. Ready?
Seven permutation tests of competition directly are not able to generate any offer public criticism. Go to this now. We will be arguing Russia and Ukraine are at odds over specific issues that we isolate in our unit. So it goes straight conceded. That means that the United States has yet to pick any sides on this in the world where the United States picks sides and sides with Russia or sides with Ukraine. And let's see hardliners gain legitimacy within Ukraine, which indicates that they will seek to join NATO, but additionally that they will shut down oil within Ukraine. They have conceded the thesis of our disad, and they have shitty defense or reasons why we would not resort to nuclear conflict. I'll get to that on the bottom of the disad. Go extend the entirety of the United States, specifically that Russia Ukraine are at odds. The UK said that, or Ukraine said that Russia should foot the bill for the gas, and Putin said the possibility of a NATO bid was totally asinine, that he would not intend to entertain that Russia would cease to become a country. These are indicative of problems between these countries and the status quo. Extend the entire conflict debate that the U.S. would pick sides. You are making an argument that the United States is always against Russia. This is not indicative of the status quo. This is not indicative of the status quo specifically between Ukraine and Russia. The United States has not picked sides on this issue, but additionally, your instances of the Cold War are not specific to this recent time period post when Ukraine has become a different country, which means we are uniquely at a time where it's problematic. Additionally, the fact that we have recently signed Jackson-Vanik is indicative of a positive relationship between the United States and Russia, but it's not indicative of a reason why Ukraine would be specifically upset about it, because it's not moving towards Russia in a significant fashion, and it's not right. It's like not moving towards
It
Russia.
doesn't matter
It's not
because
helping Ukraine.
We've isolated that these two issues are like the sticking points of these relations that the U.S. needs.
Yeah, and we've isolated these couple issues as sticking points for the relationships between Russia and Ukraine, specifically the gas issue and the NATO issue. The next argument I want you to extend is that the hardliners would become incensed and be able to coalesce around the fractures that are coalesce beyond the fractures that are currently keeping them from maintaining power. But additionally, that means that when the United States is supporting people who really hate Russia, the Ukraine will be led to do things that are rash and probably should not do. But those are our impacts. They say that they don't think the United States can. They don't think that the United States could do anything about the pipeline issue. Our argument is specifically that Ukraine would shut down massive amounts of gas that are going from Russia through Gazprom through the Ukraine into the European Union. In a world where that shuts down, there's a high propensity for resource conflict in the European Union. But additionally, it means that there's probably going to piss off Russians because they no longer have access to one of their main economic benefits. Their next argument is that they would never cut off the pipeline. This argument is understanding in a world where Russia is cutting off the pipeline. That is the analysis that Megan makes. This is not our scenario. We're talking about Ukraine cutting off the pipeline. This is specific to Ukraine, not Russia. I hope this is clear to you guys. But additionally, you say that Russia is never going to cut off gas. Also, not our argument what?
They concede their internal link arguments to say that the old regime has already talked about this.
They concede the arguments that the hardliners have already suggested that they would be willing to do this, which means that they are not having any game on the specificity of our internal link war claims. Go to the next scenario about joining NATO. They have straight conceded the possibility that they join NATO causes Russia to get into war with Ukraine. This is not checked back by national missile defense, and there's the possibility of conventional war, which necessarily lead to a breakdown to nuclear war. This is because Russia has decreased its conventional weapons capabilities over the past several years, which makes it try or die, which means that the nuclear missile defense is not able to check back, or national missile defense doesn't check back in a world where it's try or die for them to be able to get their gas, to sell gas to Ukraine in order to make money to keep their economy going. It's an existential threat for them. They have to do. They don't have a chance, even if there's a low probability that their nuclear weapons are successful. They will fire them, which means the United States necessarily has to respond as well. But I will get to that more on the map debate at the bottom of the advantage there. Next argument is that they have a bunch of technology that is insufficient. Our argument is that United States technology is not sufficient to stop Russia from going to war with the Ukraine, specifically over joining NATO. But additionally, the fact that they say that Russia would not have the economy to generate these things that fly straight in the face of their arguments about how Russia is currently able to modernize their military, probably indicative of Russian economy being significant enough to mandate this technology in the status quo and get hypersonic missiles, which means that they probably wouldn't be able to do this. But additionally, they have sufficient reserves of foreign stock, or sufficient reserves of gold that would be able to fund the managing of technology, which means that there's no risk that they're getting any arguments about how they don't have a sufficient technology. But additionally, they make the argument that they would have oil, so they wouldn't have to do it. Our argument is that they need to sell this oil to someone in order to make money, and their main consumer is the European Union. In a world where that is cut out, they are terminally fucked, and they have to go to war. But additionally, they say that we wouldn't. What is their last argument?
That a conventional war wouldn't happen.
No, they say a conventional war wouldn't happen. No warrant for this analysis. They are conceding that in a world where Putin has literally said that there would be no state in a world where Ukraine joins NATO, that they're obviously going to go to war. This is an asinine argument with zero warrant, and they conceded that this leads to distinction. We will win the argument on the mat today that in a world where Russia even launches nuclear weapons, the United States necessarily has to respond with nuclear weapons, because there is a propensity that the nuclear missile device, or that the national missile shields fail, in which case the United States needs to have already launched missiles, which means that there's no ability for Matt to check in a world where nuclear missile defense systems become capable, and that necessarily leads to a nuclear conflagration. What?
Two arguments. One, they say that the hardliners would never do this because they want to put their people at risk.
First, they say that hardliners would never do this because they want people to put their people at risk. The definition of hardliners is doing dumb shit. This is exactly what they've been posturing about for the last 20 years, and probably a reason why they're going to do this now. No reason why the hardliners are not going to sacrifice their population. The whole idea behind hardliners is that they're nationalists and they want to pursue the interests of the Ukrainian population. They want to pursue the interests of the idea of Ukraine, which is only going to happen in a world where they join NATO and stop stop selling oil to get to Russia. What was the other argument?
Second argument is that a conventional war is functionally a genocide with Ukraine, which
Second argument, they say that it's essentially a genocide with Ukraine. This has not stopped people from waging conventional wars in the past. We have seen time and time again the willingness of nationalists to wage war against people that is just not feasible. I will isolate Iranian and Iraq war in the 1980s, in which Iranians literally had hundreds of times more casualties because they were fighting for a nationalist belief system. Shows that there is no ability for these kind of normative claims about how conflicts are resolved in a world of rational actors to check in a world of nationalism. Go to the top of the advantage there. First argument is that Russia's increasing its military Thursday. We holding the thesis that there's not a war on the status quo. There's no propensity of a breakdown, which means that a risk of the disad subsumes your 2030 time frame. In a world where there's a breakdown between Ukrainian and Russian relations almost overnight, that means that we're totally subsuming on time frame, Joe. This means that there's no ability for them to get out of this debate like they did last time. The next argument is they say that Syria and Iran and the Magnitsky Amendment are problematic. They are not sufficient to overcome. There have been hard times between Russia and the United States historically, but Russia has simply not stopped providing things to the United States, proven by the fact that they've been giving us the ability to move stuff into Afghanistan for literally the last 10 years, despite all of the problems between them, means that there is no risk that there's an impact to this entire position. But additionally, they say that Russia is expanding to cut out the United States APEC group. Our argument is that this will be sufficiently a long time frame for that it's had to subsume it, but additionally that this is just not true, and that trade ties would generally be able to check because Russia cannot isolate itself from what is still the largest consumer economy in the world and will not change until at least after 2040, which means your time frame analysis probably bunk in the first place. You say that there's not an instant proliferation, you know incentivize proliferation because missiles get shot down. That's wrong. It's an incentive to do more proliferation because you need to figure out ways past all of the nuclear barriers that are set up by the plant action, which forms more insidious forms of technology that are able to disseminate nuclear material. These are things like nukes and suitcase bombs, which Katie laughs at, but actually do cause nuclear conflagration because in a world where Russia is able to set off a nuke somewhere in New York, that means that the United States necessarily must retaliate against Russia, which does lead to a nuclear war and a launch of weapons. Any weapon launch is going to be sufficient to cause a nuclear war insofar as we only need to win that something like 10 nukes would be launched to cause sufficient dust to be kicked up to cause the kind of extinction that we're talking about, which means that we are winning a straight link turn to this. The propensity for terrorists to establish this, to establish ties to these nuclear materials is highly probable, but additionally, the argument about nationalism being increased in a world post-plan because we piss off Russia just generally means that nationalists come to power, which means that there's a higher propensity of them pursuing these rash technologies like nukes that necessarily lead to conflagration that NMD does not share.
Okay. So it's going to be an overview, and then the disad and the advantage. So everybody ready? Okay. We are always going to win a higher probability of the Ukraine-Russia disad happening because we are giving you specific examples about how this is going to embolden the hardliners. Megan basically gives us all this analysis, which means that we have an impact of the Ukraine going to NATO. This happens on a much faster time frame because this is basically immediate, right? Like, we are winning arguments that perceptually all the United States needs to do is when we announce we're going to put this new missile defense in, that's going to cause the hardliners to come into power, which is going to trigger this. That's going to be a faster time frame than what's the time frame that they're isolating about putting the missile defense defense system into these countries. Even if we already have the technology available and it can be implemented, that doesn't matter because it's still going to take a long time to ship all these countries or ship all this material over there and actually set up the infrastructure. It means we're always going to be outweighing in terms of time frame. Additionally, their impact scenario is very nebulous about some random country that's going to strike the United States, but we are always going to be outweighing them in terms of time frame on this issue as well because they don't isolate specific time frame or a specific person that's going to be going and attacking the United States, and we are always going to be winning that that's like a very low probable scenario from actually happening. Prefer probability, so you should always prefer probability over magnitudinal claims about extinction because we talk about extinction every round, but it doesn't actually happen. But when we actually look at proximate wars that are happening right now, like individual people will die of a conventional war. If you just ignore those people, then you're forcing them to dispose of populations. But most importantly, we should prioritize like conventional war over nebulous nuclear war claims because extinction is not really going to happen by nuclear war, but we're still always going to win on terms of time frame. So on the dissent, they're conceding the entirety of this consent across our second link, specifically the plan in Bolton's hardliners. That's enough to get them to the NATO bid. They are always want. Don't give them credence on their scenario. Always prefer the specificity of our specific warrants. That gets us 100% access to our impact scenario. They say that they're always going to be able to solve back for a nuclear war because of missile defense, but we don't even need. We can still win the fact that there would be missiles launched, which would cause like a cascading effect that would lead to a nuclear war from happening. But we can always get a conventional war. They're basically giving us that, and that's the equivalent of a genocide. Because it's basically Russia rolling in and killing all the Ukrainians. Like Putin even said himself, the Ukraine would not even exist as a state. So you should also probably prioritize those impacts too, in terms of you don't want to cause a genocide to happen. Do you want anything else on this piece of paper?
You can talk about Jack Vanek, I guess.
I don't.
And necessarily, okay.
I don't think that's necessary. Okay, on the advantage. I know Katie's going to probably go into this whole impact scenario about how preemptive strike is always going to be inevitable in a world in which we don't curb proliferation. But they're conceding arguments that, first of all, Iran will slowly proliferate in the name of sanctions. Even if it's true that the missile defense system means that they won't be able to shoot their weapons, so there wouldn't be any sort of reason to proliferate, that still means that they're going to be proliferating, which is enough to cause the inevitable strike that you're talking about. Like, Israel doesn't care if it's going to be a missile defense system happening now. Additionally, you also can see the argument that green tech solves resource wars, which means that your imminent resource wars argument is basically is never going to happen because it's always solved back in terms of squad. It means that there's no reason to do the plan to embolden the Ukrainian hardlines. It's going to cause the war. It's going to cause the war from happening. Additionally, what? Oh, additionally, you're continuing arguments about how you're going to be increasing nationalism in Russia. That's bad for a few reasons, because that's probably going to embolden them to sell like nuclear material to other countries like they do all the time anyways. But most importantly, you also see the argument you're going to be increasing new different forms of terrorism, which means we're going to have like thousands of people dying over and over and over again because terrorist attacks are constantly going to be happening. They're going to develop these awesome new weapons like chemical biological weapons, so Logan tells you. But so that means that you're not only increasing Russian nationalism, which means that you cause the wars that you're talking about that are not happening in the squo, and to increase terrorism. Not to mention the fact that we are winning the dissent, which is always going to outweigh you in terms of time frame and probability, and you prefer those over any sort of magnitudinal claim.
The order is going to be the criticism, the one I see that is said.
All right, sorry, go ahead.
Ready? Conceded independent voting issue means that's an easy reason for you to reject women in this debate, but also they are conceding several arguments on the 1AC, which would indicate why would outweigh a world of the dissent, especially when we are doing something active to prevent violence that's going to inevitably happen in the status quo. Okay. First, extend a no value to life, turn the Megan makes the EMG. You concede that the rhetorical act of reading a value to life impact is what makes genocide inevitable, because it creates a political focus where we can't focus on individual cultures because we assume that all individuals are the same and come from the same background. This creates bad policy making and should be rejected in the debate space. That is the argument that Megan articulates in the EMG. It also means that the Ukraine genocide impact becomes absolutely inevitable because of the 1NC Speech Act. This is isolated as an independent reason and an independent voting issue of the EMG. They do not respond to it. This is an independent reason. Very easiest way out of this debate. Easiest way out of the debate. Permutation does not resolve an instance of rhetorical violence. They do not make a claim about how their 1NC Speech Act goes away or why they get to separate it, which means that this is the easiest way for you to vote in this debate. But if you want to vote in the substance, One is all war is inevitable in worlds without the 1AC. We say that Russia is increasing their military technology. You can see several arguments about how their military technology is getting really sweet and how they're creating supersonic missiles. We also say that there's a risk that terrorists are getting weapons supply. As for several arguments you're making around the floor, unfortunately, you don't seem to realize that these arguments flow in the opposite direction. They just make war inevitable, which means that we have to do something. You do not have a competitive policy option, which means that it is a question of doing something versus doing nothing. This is not the status quo does not resolve any of the conflict of the inevitable war that is coming in the status quo, which means that even if we do not win the time frame, we win, the war will absolutely happen inevitably in a world without the instance of the 1AC, which means that all of your DISAD impacts become inevitable. There's only a risk that the 1AC could be beneficial. The 1AC is more probable than Adam judging us against you in a debate. Also, it has greater magnitude and outweighs the time frame of the DISAD because the risk of the DISAD time frame being longer than you actually expect. It means that it is less preferable than the probability and magnitude coming off of the 1AC. There's not an incentive to proliferate when you spend a lot of money in something that you know will not work at all. You do not buy a bunch of nuclear material. You do not create a bunch of missiles if you know they will not work. You can see arguments that say that this has 100% solvency as per a test that was done in October where we shot down short-term, long-term, and cruiser missiles with our anti-ballistic missile system. This means that there's only this means that this has 100% solvency. That is absolutely conceded. It probably short-circuits the impact of your DISAD on suitcase bombs. This chemical biological weapon argument is absolutely new in the LOR. I don't know where this articulation comes from. Logan certainly doesn't make it. The 1AC does not cause a unique increase in this. There's not an articulation about why that would be true. On suitcase bombs. Suitcase bombs have never happened before. Why? Because they're too untenable. Because either they are not big enough to cause a large impact, or they are too big and you have to transport them. This means that there is not an incentive to create suitcase bombs. And even if we did increase nationalism as per your DISAD, that is only a linear impact. And even if Russia did pursue dangerous technology, they know that the U.S. military technology is the best. It is decades before, it is decades further along in the future than their military technology, which means that we are capable of resolving a lot of the problems that their military technology could create, even in the time frame of Russia creating new crazy technology in a world of nationalism, which means that even if you spot them, that we create a bunch of nationalism in Russia, there is still an enormous time frame deficit between when Russia would be able to develop these weapons. That articulation, it comes in 2030 at the very soonest as per some 1AC analysis, which means that we are winning the time frame question of this debate, which you sparked as so important. Dissent. Yes, we did not answer your uniqueness. Why? Because it is 100% irrelevant. Because your impacts, every single impact argument that you read on the DISAD proves that you do not understand the 1AC. All of Russia's weapons are awesome absent the 1AC. All their missiles will be shot down in the world of the 1AC because the missile defense shield goes up and our anti-ballistic shields are 100% effective. You can see that argument. Also, this does not escalate because trade ties check. That is an argument that you harp on all throughout this debate. Means that we would probably not go to war with Russia. Ukraine would probably not go to war with Russia. The hardliners who rely on the military in order to have the money to create, to fund technology to screw over their people would not go to war because they wouldn't have the funds to do so. Additionally, the U.S. military technology is the best. You can see that argument. No internal link to your DISAD and wars where the U.S. would be able to take control before you reach a terminal impact. Look, other ties check before the DISAD impact can reach a terminal status and outweigh the affirmative. Yeah. Also, you don't even say, you say no nuclear war in your LOR impact count, which means that you wouldn't even evaluate the DISAD impacts as per what their recommendation is. On the instance of Ukraine shutting down the pipeline. Ukraine would not kill the pipeline because it would kill a bunch of their people. This prevents, these talks were prevented in the future, in the past, which means that they probably realized ideas why this would be a bad idea. Even if they don't give a shit about their people, they certainly give a shit about their economy because it's necessary for the military.
Did you shut my